Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. The title, Cultivating Global Emotional Stability, has come to me. I also call this, the view is interchangeable with either saying a planetary or a universal emotional stability. The concept of emotional stability is the next part of the puzzle of mankind, especially as he attempts to intellectually solve it. The intellectual realm is a sort of approach that either makes the moment more animate or inanimate, and it tends to be more inanimate. That means the more intellectually we're trying to be certain of something, the more the precision of our inner realms is trying to justify the external object. The Sufis had a saying where they would say, trying to intellectually search for truth is like whipping a dead donkey and expecting it to go faster, to run fast. The intellect has to cage, then examine. Another way of saying this is that a quantum physicist was asked, I forget his name, I think it was Niels Bohr. I'm not sure who it was, but some quantum physicist was asked, he's like, hey man, what about these results of quantum physics? Can you tell us? And the man says, it's like, hey man, it's like we're getting a tiger from a leopard or something, a jaguar from its natural environment, putting it in a cage, then studying what a jaguar is. So for me, it's another way of saying we are studying the caged world when it's first meaningful. I find the kind of greater situation is that uncertainty is more valuable certainty when everybody's kind of trapped in their own inner simulation, right? When I say trapped in the inner simulation, I mean that word could be intense, but what it is simply that our attention is being something before having access to the visible, to the observable realm. Or, I shouldn't say observable, because observable, for example, the contents of imagination are also observable. They're not tangible, but they are observable. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that materiality is not the first room we enter. The first room we are in is actually immaterial. It's about projection in space. When something is projected in space, it's an illusion of fullness and emptiness. So man has to filter the illusion and filter truth out of himself. I think it was Lewis Carroll who wrote Alice in the Wonderland. He had this quote. I was like, let me see if I can find it. There we go. There we go. There's this. So here's the quote, guys. His answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. That's something Lewis Carroll, the writer of Alice in Wonderland, has wrote. His answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. That's what I mean by the inner reality, the subjective realm, the sort of subtler classification or of all phenomenology that is present. Sometimes when you go to find your true self, you don't actually find your true self. You find a conditional acceptance of phenomena. To truly attain an unconditional acceptance of phenomena, that is a very I find only those beings who their life has taken them beyond the language threshold are capable. That means they know there's something more than language going on. Language is like believe it or not, tiny percentage of the world. We are this was a huge question for me. One of the biggest transformations of my of the various ways I've looked at this world is that I came to the realization that thought needs a power source. Thought needs there to be another thought to be aware of it. It's kind of in nature, we see it's like there's male and female. In nature, we see this. The male birds do a dance in front of the female bird. Female bird likes to dance, party time, But the thing is, there's a sort of dualism. Things are coming in pairs, and so I took this idea to a point where I was like, what if there is a visible self and an invisible self? And then I thought, where would the invisible self be? And then I saw the word invisible, and it's in the visible. That's why it's invisible. Like, for example, the atoms of that visible tree, the more we zoom in, the more they are invisible. To be honest, on some level, any sort of speech in this plane of existence is an exploration. It's being piloted. It's like we are trying to escape the temporary by lying to ourselves about the continuity of processes. But many processes in life discontinue, and many start anew. Lewis Carroll has this quote where he says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And we have at the same time the Sufi mystic poet Rumi saying, what you seek is seeking you. And we have this at the same time Meister Eckhart saying, the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. I find the reason, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, is because there is design in this world. At least that's one thing that one can become familiar with. Something that I don't have to worry about throughout the day is the design of phenomena, at least. And sometimes in one subtler planes, one has to attentively and consciously keep design. But the way the world is kind of shaped is that whether we pay attention to it or not, the design of that tree remains. So what does that mean? That means in the sphere of from beyond the edges of the sphere of our consciousness, there are still designs present. Another way of saying this is that there are endless inventions in the world, they just haven't been invented yet. It's like the design and the pattern and the possibility and the opportunities there, but it hasn't been extracted because nobody's opened that shelf. What I'm trying to get to with this is that upon the realization of the personal dimension of the intellect, how the intellect appears to a personality that feels it is in its own room. You see, it's like you won't know how much this will help you in communicating with people in general around the world and anywhere, any moment. You know, the fact that, how would I say it? The observant mind can never be alone. The next phase of human behavior will require an emotional stability of a collective nature. I have realized people don't care. This is going to be an intense and extreme quote saying, but I feel people don't care too much about thoughts. We notice their transience as we sleep and awaken, as the days go by. So what that means is I'm pretty sure people are not worried about subjective truth too much. I feel the soul knows what it is, right? So another way of saying this is that if a subjective truth or a sort of intellectual certainty has a limit, that means the solution requires something more than that. And so I notice people's communication and language is one where it's occurring in different rooms. There is a room of conception. There are rooms of familiarity. There are rooms of where the person is not familiar with. Just like how you can step into a house you've never been before, you can step into a state of mind you have never been before. And the children of the future generations are being more encouraged to explore their states of mind. Now, this has a good and bad thing. It's the reason is because we are the pioneers of 1,000 years to come. What that means is we will. It's like the pioneer had an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage was it got to see the glory first. The disadvantage was it had to also see the suffering first. Like nowadays it is so easy to write, right? Like now, when I want to, like, you can go to the store, buy pieces of paper, there's computers everywhere, on online databases where content can be recorded and shared. But back in the day, during the time of Socrates, during the time of many people, it's like there wasn't an ease. There was a challenge. Many things that are simple now were complex then, right? So we have the mind that has the advantage of experiencing the simplicity that the past's complexity couldn't attain. You can say that Socrates was in his own room of history, and me and you right now are in our own room of history. And every moment in history brings with it a responsibility. History is the responsibility of conscious beings to be administered. Certain man made technologies can only be maintained by man. And when I say man, I'm speaking about the Homo sapien, because fundamentally we are one species. It's like if fish could talk, if birds could talk, if wolves and all the other animals could talk, okay, we'd have an automatic kind of bond of species, you know? It's as if fish would get more along together and birds would get more along together, that, and humans would get more along together than a human with a fish or a bird with a fish. It's like their relationships become limited. The minds are also preserved. It's kind of like I consider it a sort of divine design where nature has privatized every person's sphere of mind. We as the human species have an ability to communicate, because if you here's the idea, guys. This is an incredible idea. Terence McKenna spoke about octopus, and he said there's a kind of octopus that it doesn't change its color just like a chameleon to mesh with the environment. The change of color of its body, of its skin, is its language. As if Terence McKenna very fascinatingly said, the octopus is a naked mind. So similarly, the only way that the mind has had an ability to be able to influence another mind, because the minds have been the external action is a reflection of the inner action. Our minds have been here's the cool thing: the whole external plane of existence is the communication of your mind. And when your mind decides not to communicate, that whole structure can be seen to be void, and the void can be seen to be non-local. So I'm telling you, this is what they call the nihilistic trap, where the person reverse engineered their conditioning from how they would became an individual. You see, we have to be careful. I'm also here with these talks because I know that there's certain parts of the forest that man should not enter, certain parts of the philosophical forest. It's like we don't need to break the idea of man that much to see what it is. Think of it this way: the scientists came and saw the particle and broke it and saw smaller particles. Similarly, man has a sort of truth and he's trying to break it and see other truths. And as he goes, he sees that the mind has an infinite ability to create. What does that mean? That means literally we can create new words. What does that mean? That means new expressions of conception, new ways that concepts are standing. What can be said? 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, some of them at war with each other over the stories that only exist in their own eyes. This world, as Hafez, this poet, was, I remember the imagery, I don't remember the exact lyrics, but Hafez has this thing where he says this world is a madhouse, and it's like endlessly throwing, if I remember correctly, throwing clay plates in the air and they fall and break. And the reason Hafez called this life a madhouse is because that is the next great challenge of humanity. If you pay attention to the mystical poetry of Hafez, Rumi, Attar, and many more, you'll notice in their writings they speak about the beloved, which is God, truth, the collective being, and they speak about the friend. And the friend is the subconscious mind. The beloved is the unconscious mind. You are your conscious mind. And so there are many archetypes. Life is so beautiful because that's why we have emotions, so you can navigate between archetypes but still have a sort of consciousness to the moment. What does that mean? That means I want you to imagine, just like how Heraclitus says no man can step in the same river twice, and it's not the same man and it's not the same river. So what does that mean? Our moments of life throughout the day is a line, and a line is made of tiny points. So it's like our experience throughout the day is moment one, moment two, moment three, moment four, moment five, moment six, like it's something like just consecutively experiencing the experience of a moment. So what's happening in each moment in this line of living that we're doing throughout the day is that there is the first dot is the first moment. So imagine I wake up and it's like just empty observance. So that's moment A. And then imagine the next moment I'm like washing my face, in the morning. And so that's moment B, And so as I see, it's a gradual arising and awakening of archetypes behind the scenes in regards to the association to the content of the moment. So what does that mean? That means emotions are the bridges between the navigation of attention between archetypes. What does that mean? That means in moment A, I'm like, yo, everything's nice. In moment B, I'm like, oh no, everything's not nice. You know? And so that emotion of niceness carrying on to the second archetype, what does that mean? That means our thoughts change quicker than our body, but our emotions are more still than our thoughts. They're slower. They're slower than our thoughts. Emotional change, it's like many thoughts need to come by. Like Romeo had to like talk a lot before Juliet heard, you know. So what I mean is it's the fascinating thing of introduction of subjective designs from one realm of perception to another. And we as human beings, this emotional stability has been dependent on rationality and logic. And rationality and logic is very crucial. Let me tell you what I mean by that, why I'm bringing this in. Rationality and logic are like the first soldiers sent into the battlefield. You must, in any situation, because the mind can, you should try. You know, you should try to observe and reclarify. And that reclarify, it's like hear what rationality has to say, then study irrationality. You know? So we are going, let's say, like seeing it like Heraclitus going, every moment is its own world. So if every moment is its own world, we say there is a new archetype to every moment. And if a moment endures, because you see, guys, this is the thing of sometimes like some people don't sleep because they feel there is more living to do sometimes. The mind is like a still surface of a pond, but it's a pond of your own experiences. And if you were to speak to me right now and say something, or if I, as you're hearing me speak, these words are like unique geometric rocks I'm throwing in a pond. Now, the rock is having an impact on the surface of the water, but it is also journeying to the core. What does that mean? The nature of the self-inquiry of the being is questioning everything. That means one tiny change makes you wonder about the whole system, right? I think it comes down to existential sensitivity and respecting the space of the mind of the human being, which is unknown. That means I totally, on some level, understand, yes, we are certain creatures, we have a certain evolutionary design, we have a certain evolutionary responsibility that comes with that design, you know? There's many unique factors where we have built a society that is idolizing people's differences, you know? Let me tell you, this is the secret, guys, by the way. A civilization continues if its attention goes on its ability. If it avoids its own opportunities, it's like the bus doors are open, but the person suddenly notices they have made no attempt to go on the bus. That's the part of life where it's an experiential engagement. Even in yoga, they would say 50% would be a sort of philosophical contemplation, a sort of practical approach for your mind to the world. And then there would be a sort of, then next would be a, how can I tell you, a practical approach of the body to the world. The body is something, the human body is something to revere. It is something to honor. And at most, but this is one of the most strange things I think a listener of this channel can hear, but you can also communicate to matter. What does that mean? That means the mind is the field in which the body is running in. That means matter and thought are taking turns as the attention oscillates between them. I've experienced moments where my attention has been local. That means in the waking conscious state, you're kind of in the room of your physical body. But in certain altered states, and also it can happen intuitively or any point, it's kind of like a fruit suddenly, it's like a seed sprouting suddenly. There's so many abilities that nature brings out of the person cannot take from nature. This is why the issue was, I'll give you an example. Like, Bodhidharma goes to this Japanese emperor. This Japanese emperor has kind of made lots of Buddhist monasteries, spread a lot of Buddhist teachings, done pretty much a lot of good stuff for Buddhism. And Bodhidharma, the fifth patriarch of Buddhism, comes to Japan, and the Japanese emperor's like, yo, man, what, like, look at all I've done. What's the merit? Pretty much another way of saying a person with external power who has done what he felt was externally good and is asking to see what the reward is. Pretty much, he's like, what's the merit in all this, Bodhidharma? And Bodhidharma scolds an emperor. It's like probably Bodhidharma's like, another emperor to scold. And so Bodhidharma says, all you have done is foolishness, and he leaves. He's disappointed, and the king gets sad, and the king's like, oh my god, how has this been foolishness? And he looks at his wise counsel, and his wise councilmen say, hey, Signor King. His wise councilmen say, the reason there was no merit was in the way you asked, not the nature of the action. So that's the very fascinating point about this. That the way you approach something will suggest what you get out of it. Some people see this planet, I've literally had conversations with people, they see this world as a prison planet. I've had a conversation with people where they feel this world is an educational planet. And I have heard too many stories. Rumi says, don't be satisfied by stories, go unfold your own myth. That unfolding of your own myth is experiential, it's not conceptual. You have to open the eyes of the heart by, in some sense, allowing the mind to be fearless. That means right now you could be the most afraid person in your life, but wonder. I'm just asking you as a designer to wonder. Wonder about the design of where this phenomenology is going. When people have stopped asking what they are from themselves, that is when the world is too shaped to change. Suffering begins when an archetype is not disposed at the right time. Archetypes come and go. It's like weather. It's like raining, and the person believes it's like sees in one moment it was raining, thinks the universe is all the time raining. It's kind of like we have to realize we developed from the children's kind of psychology. Like we were all children at some point, and as children, you give a toy to a child, it's happy, it's in heaven. You take the toy away, the child is crying, it's not in heaven. What does that mean? It's an on and off, hot and cold relationship. The emotions are hot and cold, and their sense of being hot and sense of being cold, their temperature is based on actually the conceptual movement. So I want you to imagine that the mind is an invisible hand that's writing, that's moving. When I say an invisible hand, I'm not trying to make this like esoteric. You don't enter the unknown like a hungry man. The unknown is nothing to devour or consume. You cannot take anything from the unknown if it's not necessary to the moment. You know, I've had moments where there was a time where in Edwards Garden, I was sitting on a rock giving a talk, kind of trusting the intuition of the moment that my phone wouldn't fall in the water. And so I remember there came a time where, as I was recording, suddenly I reached a concept where the concept was forbidden. Intuitively, I know it's like it shouldn't be touched. And that happens, especially when you pilot in your subjective realm. Sometimes you reach the edge of certain concepts, the edge of certain designs that you see further from, but then they are not necessary to communicate. That means even if you wanted to, it's like, why try to push a building? We have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of not the person, but what is the purpose of knowing? What is the purpose of knowledge? What is the purpose of all these people pretty much saying, know thyself in different moments in history? I find the purpose of knowing is the evolution into the unknown. We can't believe anything ever. The system is changing too much. What are we believing? It's like I sleep, I wake up, sure, I could have the same belief as yesterday, but I'm not the same person as yesterday. So how can I have the same belief as yesterday? So it becomes constantly the maintenance, like it's very fascinating. Our personalities are really challenging the test of time. I find that the future generations will require people who hear the heartbeat of the species and understand that human beings are not here to be in intellectual kind of value hunger games, of resources on the planet, a sort of economical scarcity making us into savage beasts. It's like we have to calm down for a bit and realize that human beings require emotional stability. I have been fascinated to realize that emotional stability, because the consciousness starts in such an isolated, lonely place, is so simple. And that's why people go towards various storylines, because life is empty without a story. So the issue becomes one of repainting, retelling a new story. Retelling a new story, which will act as the proper mythology of the future generations. It is like the greatest task of the writer to make eternal the transience of his mind, his or her mind. When I look at this picture I've chosen for the wallpaper, you notice that lighthouse. And when you look at that lighthouse, and you in some sense look at everything else in the background, it's as if the lighthouse is also made from nature. Man, what is man-made is also nature-made, strangely. Because where else could have man gotten his influences? And the thing is that if he's multidimensional, well, guess what? There's a world inside our world. We got to play Inception games. We all got to start spinning stuff on tables. vision. There's something much more fascinating than the personal life of the human being. I'm telling you, there's something that it's a rare opportunity. Imagine you've come to Wonderland and you can only experience these rides only in this plane of existence. So many people are trying to get out of this world that I was shocked at first. When I looked at religions, I'm like, what is this? They're all ways of escaping the world. You know, it's like the world is a bad place because either man made a mistake or the world is just not evolved yet. And so what do? You know, and so certain aspect of our population, and I will say this very boldly because the numbers are giant. There are so many human beings that as I speak are entertaining a multidimensional relationship with the world. It's just that only the singular has been established in consciousness. We have not explored the imagination because reality made it forbidden. Because matter claimed the whole spotlight. Matter is like, imagine you have a camera, right? And the camera is meant to film like a whole scene of people. But instead of the camera filming the whole scene of people, someone is standing right in front of the lens. And the idea of materialism is standing right in front of the lens of consciousness. So consciousness feels it cannot see anything. But there's definitely more going on behind the scenes. To be honest, there is limits to any energetic system that in its expression can alter its state. In our limitations, we are wondering about the limitless. In our temporality, we're wondering why this creature has a reason to continue. Before language developed, there was a silent explanation of the program of nature occurring as an unconscious movement. But when the creature became conscious, suddenly the whole world was permitted to realign in accordance to the eyes of the being. And that's the mythological part of our livelihood. Our existence is the proof of our divinity. I say emotional stability is necessary for the species because a lot of us do not think with a memory pattern that is stable. So what does that mean? Because we're traveling from moment to moment, to have one view on the whole moment all the time at after some point feels burdensome. So this is why it's so important to abide by your true nature and get introduced to the unknown that way, rather than diving towards it like a child who wants candy on Halloween. You know, a lot of these esoteric societies, it's costume games within complete ignorance to the collective nature of the will of the world. That the world is not some hidden being. It's like a group of fish went to this wiser fish, and they're like, wiser fish, tell us what is God? What is this ocean? Tell us, is ocean a bigger fish that we have to worship? And then the older, wiser fish was like, hell no. The wiser fish is like, no, the truth that you seek is the currents that move you. It is what is holding all the fish together. It is what is within and without you. And the fish can't conceive of the ocean. Literally, they can't conceptualize the ocean because it can't be a concept, because it is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Nowhere is also included as part of everywhere. And so, what I'm saying is that these fish, instead of studying the nature of the ocean and realigning their vision, they're going and trying to worship a whale. They're going and trying to worship a sort of more omniscient, omnipresent archetype. But I am telling you, language is not the God of man. Your attention is the God of your thought. When I say the pilots of consciousness navigate their plane of existence, I'm using the playful metaphor of an actual pilot inside an airplane who has to navigate all the passengers, everything that is part of that that plane of existence. Now, similarly, the human consciousness, when it opens its eyes in the waking state, is suddenly finds a plane of existence and finds that its mind is navigating its own meaning. That's the privilege of consciousness. You have a choice in things now. Before, you were just the unconscious movement of nature. This is why the problem with, I say that language can be cruel, in that it can keep people in a certain behavioral pattern. And how can I tell you? Emotions can blind person to the thoughts in their space. What does that mean? That means I could be having an important phone call, then I could see something, let's say while I'm speaking on the street outside, I could see something happen in front of me so violent and meaningless and inefficient that suddenly an emotion comes in the middle of a phone call I already am. In one process of engagement, suddenly the attention stretches a new line of vision. So the mind is incredibly multidimensional, and if you fear multidimensionality, you are at some point fearing the potential of your vision to see beyond this dimension. And there are great questions to ask. One question is like, is there something beyond this? The second question is, if there was something beyond this, would we be able to see it? The third view is like, okay, maybe there's nothing beyond this. Maybe there is nothing beyond this for now. But that notion where there is nothing beyond this, it means the person is willing to step out of that room of thought. And thought has architecture, guys. It has design. Sometimes when I speak, it's at first it was very linguistic, but then it went to image. How do we serve the emotional states of 8 billion people while at the same time getting them interested into this 4 billion year old science project that needs being attended to? If we don't attend to it, we have let go of our own. It's as if it's like, how much do you care for your family members or your close friends or those you are in a relationship with? You care a lot for them. It's like there's an importance to their existence. So similarly, this is an individual archetype. Now Mr. Within is saying, now imagine you feeling that same importance, just like how a loved one is in an emergency, that importance you feel, imagine now you feeling it for the collective identity of your species, the story that will go in the ears of the children of the future generations, and the stories that they will tell themselves, and the decisions that will either break the world or fix it. The clouds are creatures of design as well. Nature is alive in as many ways man can see himself alive. Believe it or not, I've had this very interesting kind of observation, and I feel imagination is being projected external. I feel when we imagine something, it's not just that neurons move, something like a sort of concentrated wave is projected from. I'm giving it a, like, to hear this playfully, but I feel the third eye is a sort of projective spherical mechanism in a more subtler place. It's not an eye, it's the eye of the world. It's like the person realizes their eyes, their known eyes, and then suddenly realizes the continuity of intelligence beyond like the roots of the tree are in a soil that is not visible. What's like the roots can't be seen, but the branches can. In some moments, you know, if in order to see the roots, there has to be a sort of you got to get a shovel and dig. That kind of mystical exploration is necessary. So emotional stability must come through narrative. It should come from the responsibility that stories can't really find you, even though ideas are dying to be in the attention of man. Literally, if an idea doesn't find itself in the sphere of human attention, it dies. It dies in the sense that it's not engaged with, so it's forgotten. You know, there's so many lost technologies as much as there's many new technologies discovered. In a changing world, everything can be given a story of life and death. This cup in front of me, I could say this cup is alive in design. You know, and then like years later or something, or when I throw it in the trash, it's like this cup has lived a good life. So anything in a changing world can be storified. And we have to realize this is the key point. The human body appears as an object. Other people appear as objects when you look at them, but they appear as subjects to themselves because every person's eyes is meant to see the outer first, then the inner. It's kind of in just the biological design. This is why I say you have to not enter the unknown by trying to escape knowledge, but by becoming content with knowledge, then you automatically see the unknown. Now, I'm taking this kind of backup approach by writing a science fiction novel that can suggest certain ways the species can move, a sort of attempt at a new narrative. But I find the impact of this collective narrative that requires to happen, it's going to have a sort of heroic journey to it. The heroic journey of the individual self into the collective value. That means the person is just valuing themselves based on their own actions. But when you realize your mind is being your whole moment, and your whole moment is being your world, suddenly there comes a care for collective action. So what that means is, just imagine there was never the concept of a friend, there was never the concept of an enemy, you know, and there was just creatures that were trying to become more efficient through space and time. So it's like, what game can we play? It's like updating the system. That seems to be one. Or reinventing a new system. That means you might not understand. You can right now consciously, especially in 2019, the modern human being can totally recalibrate their conditioning. What that means is, throughout history, people have found more of an ability to step out of their conditioning. That's the point of the future generations. What we are so extremely dependent on now, in the future, they're not going to care about. And that's a good thing. Sometimes you want the mistakes of the world to be forgotten, but sometimes you also want the efforts of the world to be seen. Like I kind of noticed this thing. I had a very interesting intuitive experience. Me, my brother, and my father go to this kind of in like intuitively. My father chooses this meetup where this man is talking about the Sikh tradition and enlightenment. And in the Sikh tradition, many people in their houses have a picture of the very holy gurus, starting from, I believe, Guru Nanak and going on to different people. And there's this concept in the Sikh enlightenment known as the Nam. The Nam is the name of God, right? The name. It's as if truth was an ultimate name, was an ultimate linguistic realization, right? So when we go to this person, it's this man, I forget his name, this guy kind of born in Canada, but he went to India and stayed with this guru named Guru Gopal Singh, if I'm saying it correctly. And the man was, of course, he was speaking so calm, and it was as if like this man was, I don't know how to tell you, he was content with the truth of his eyes that he had witnessed, right? So, and I remember when we go in this house, I can't stop staring at this picture on the wall, and one figure in that picture on the wall, my attention just got locked down like a laser beam on that one figure. And eventually I asked the guy, who is that figure on the wall out of the 10 gurus, or the out of the picture of the gurus? And the guy says Guru Arjan, right? So I randomly become introduced to Guru Arjan, but like who he was, his name, and then I look up his kind of life and his stories, and I get so inspired, I get shocked. And Guru Arjan was a compiler, and then also an admin. So there's many incredible stories. Of course, he had a very tragic, very divine exit out of this world, you know. I was so inspired by the stories of Guru Arjan that I realized the only thing that is keeping human beings here is care. And care doesn't have an intellectual explanation. It has an emotional balance, imbalance, feeling vibe, and acting vibe. So what it means is that we have not reached the true table of the intellect. The true table of the intellect, I think it's going to be reached by the year 2400. We have to just build a strange bridge of a narrative strong enough. It's as if for the first time, as Buckminster Fuller said, let me say this first. Buckminster Fuller said it's kind of like we're all on spaceship Earth. So now that we're all on spaceship Earth, it's as if the walls of this spaceship are thinning. They are thinning with the lack of attention of the species to its true nature, to itself. And because we have built a sort of artificial safe haven and we are escaping the natural world, we're not just forgetting the natural world, but we are trying to recreate the infinite mind of nature technologically. And there is a danger there where we have not truly experienced the natural mind of man, yet we are creating an unnatural mind of infinite simulative potential. What that means is in one of my science fiction novels, there's a character named Dante who's built this simulation of heaven and earth, and so many beings are left in this simulation of heaven and hell. Right? And it's a video, kind of virtual video game, but the people in the simulation don't know. And so there's this main character named Rasoul, and there's his robot kind of AI friend who's like like similar to like a tribe. Like robots are spiritual in this book, you know. So the robot suddenly he's got a vision from his inner program that they need to go stop Dante, and Rasoul is intuitively, synchronistically called into that moment, you know. So Dante eventually ends up, actually I did this on purpose, Dante ends up being a girl, right? This young girl who's kind of like actually a star being. And oh man, I'll send the chapters out. I'll probably like. Anyways, what I'm trying to get to is that there was a simulation made inside a natural world, and a simulation made inside that. It's kind of like this world is just a performance oriented thing to some degree, and a balanced performance. And so we're kind of seeking the balanced performance of the species. So the responsibility of the inner realm is to handle the emotional side of the things. The responsibility of the outer realm is in some sense to create resources for the inner realm. I find every person's mind, given the right resources, can evoke genius. It's just it's kind of like when you're in the basement, your phone has a few like signal, like its signal is weak. But when you step out of like the parking lot, suddenly the signal arises, right? It has signal. And I find human minds, in accordance to how delicately, how cruel the environment has been to their mind, and how cruel they have been to their mind, they're probably lost in a sort of thought loop. What that means is our species is language is. I'm going to share this image, even though I say this, please at the same time also acknowledge the bright side of language and how it's an advanced technology. But it's as if language is like this alien that's on every person's head, right? And the species is slowly waking up and wants to take off the hat of language to see what else there is. Now, when the being does take off the hat of language, they will immediately, as Attar says, a wave of uncertainty hits you. A moment of empty observance finds you. Now, in that moment of empty observance, you are seeing a clear mirror of existence. You are in the presence of your true nature. You can no longer lie. You can no longer project language. You're in the presence of what the ultimate core of your intelligence, which has never moved. It is the unchanging witness that has watched everything change so far. Something strange that came, that I realized from the story of Layli and Majnun. And Layli and Majnun were kind of like Romeo and Juliet, like two kind of, they were like mythological lovers, you know. Their story is there's many stories that are remembered. And so Majnun was in love with Layli, but Layli was so she respected her father so much that instead of marrying Majnun, she married the person her father wanted. Majnun, who was ridiculously saw a sort of divine love in Layli, saw God's love in Layli, like he was kind of he wanted to marry her, but the situation ends up that he can't. So when this happens, he takes himself to exile. When he sees his presence hurts what he cares about, he in some sense leaves. And so Majnun goes on this exile, and hopefully I can remember this. He goes on to this exile, and eventually he comes back and finds Layli's tombstone. And there's stories where it's so profound. It was like heavy. Like Majnun's gone on like the walls of the kind of right beside the wall of the tombstone of Layli. He's kind of carved like I hear her voice in all these walls. I hear her voice in everything, as if he's written some sort of divine poetic hymn. And it's the dissolution of the archetype. That's really what happens, because love is a space of freedom. So in that freedom, the true nature of people engages. So it was this kind of idea of a transcendental relationship with the meaning extracted from the external realm. A question that brings peace is just instantly, when there's a moment of rage, the person just looking at that, how would I say it? It's like, who are you fighting against? That question diffuses anger. Because to be honest, and no person on this planet has ever had an enemy. They could never see the enemy's eyes. That's the magnificence of our position, our evolutionary position. We walk alone, yet because we walk alone, we can walk together. Because we are individual creatures of a common biological pattern, we can activate efficient movements. And so, really, the thing was, if we were not the most evolved species on this planet, I wouldn't be so worried. That's the situation, guys. Because we are the most evolved species on this planet, that's why I'm worried that the species is not exploring the unconscious. It's just being content with the conscious to a point where it doesn't care about it anymore. They say life is a dream. I think till the age of 25, it is a dream. You're chasing your mind's desire. But when that chase stops, something strange happens. The philosophical perspective on karma changes. That means, as my understanding of the word action has changed throughout life, as I've done different actions, right? Similarly, it's as if the concept of karma is also prone to change. So what does that mean? That means even your suffering changes. Nothing remains forever. If it did, it should be examined. If somebody's suffering from the same objective thing, like, it's like, that's a miracle, you know? Life is strangely internally a solo journey, externally a collective journey. Externally, the external technologies must lead to a sort of efficiency for the inner. So what does that mean? For the first time, we must reestablish, rebuild a civilization and a new collective narrative where what the ethos is pointing to is we have to be responsible for the inner realms. We have to reestablish a new relationship with what is behind our eyes and in front of our eyes. And unless this is done, what is the species doing with its time? That's why it's a global emotional stability. This is why Mr. Within says we are in a situation where we shouldn't be so stuck up on answers. When people are really intensely looking for answers, they easily become soldiers in a war. Because they're looking for the truth. Anything that can act like truth to them, something they haven't seen, they'll suddenly think it's the truth. This is why it's life is an opportunity to get to know how your eyes are open. You know, it's kind of like seeing some person waking up in the morning and being like, "Oh, another day," and and then someone waking up and being like, "Oh my God, another day," like it becomes that's the difference. The future generations are very easily manipulated, but by what appears cool to them. That means the cultural program somehow, and the entertainment industry is using it. But I can say that there's more efficient things that can happen with the cultural program. Responsibility, because it takes more energy than being irresponsible, is pushed aside in the distance as an aim. So you got to realize sometimes the same courage that requires that the moment you see a fear, you instantly acknowledge it so you don't waste time. So your mind doesn't waste time with that fear, constantly wondering if it can or cannot. You know, sometimes there are moments in life where it's kind of like the person has to command their mind and move. It's like the being's attention is receiving data beyond the language threshold. It's beyond a sensory command. It's a sort of intuitive command. It's too instantaneous to have a reference or an image in time. That's when something's beyond the language threshold. An evolutionary return to the nature of the moment's presence. That is it. That is our greatest power. Man either abides by nature or he doesn't. If he doesn't abide by nature, guess what? You're alone. You're alone in a sort of vehicle of intellect, and that's possible. Many people are living in the vehicles of their thought, but they're inhabiting their thoughts. But I find thoughts do not come from thoughts. You cannot think like look at the image that the mainstream is giving people about their minds. They're saying, okay, the mind's a bit unknown, hard problem of consciousness, but at the same time, the person is saying, okay, so what are these images that I see in my mind? So these are thoughts. So who's thinking of the thought? So there's a thinker. But wait a minute, isn't the thinker also a thought? So how can a thought create a thought? The max conclusion that could be received from just thinking a thought is creating a thought is that it's kind of like a cell, like a biological cell duplicates itself, right? Similarly, you can say thought is duplicating itself as another thought, as another thought, as another thought, that a thought, It's like too many thoughts. So I find human beings, this is a strange concept, but I think in the future the concept of a government will be so distrusted that the government has to reestablish a new relationship of trust, and trust tends to just appear from giving. So what does that mean? That means the system, the creature can be cruel. I'll give you an example. Like they put two lab rats, in this kind of like box or something, and then these scientists at a university, and one of the rats was stronger. The other one was weaker. And these rats, when they would get bored, they would wrestle. Now, when they would wrestle, the bigger rat, the stronger rat would win. And the stronger rat would endlessly win. Just think about the ego of a person. I'm endlessly going to win in this world. Like, so the stronger rat keeps winning, but it wins to a point where it sees the weaker rat no longer wants to play. So the stronger rat is also smart. So what it does is it develops something where it loses intentionally, right? It loses intentionally to keep the kind of playful relationship going. Now, I find this stronger rat and weaker rat is another way of seeing the political system of our species. How there are those who are have more of an influence, like a single action of them is more, can change more than a single action of the citizen, right? So now what it is it's this kind of ancient system. So I'm trying to think like, okay, how can we change this ancient system? And I noticed we can't, because there's so many people who their lives are dependent on the system to remain. So the only way is that if we can't change government 1.0, we have to think of another parallel dimension of government 2.0. Right? So every nation is like, whoa, 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 what's our government 2.0 like? The heads of every nation. So this government 2.0, and like a musician right now, I'm going on a riff. Government 2.0 is as if the whole organization's ability could jump up into the air from the past location the past way it was, and jump into a new location. It's the possibility of the what ifs. So this is the hilarious thing, guys. Don't you think that we can use, like, think of it this way. Let's say so many people, it's crazy. It's like politics back in the day was a source of honor for people. People were felt great about the governments of their nations. But eventually, through the corruptions of human nature, the same mistake that communism made is the same mistake that every governmental institution made. That thinking that the nature of the human being is ready to implement the action. And of course, the nature of the human being is not ready, and it won't be ready because it's too much of a changing and kind of still a bit of a savage place on this planet. So as long as there's savageness and violence, nobody has a steady mind. If there's no steady mind, there's no steady character. There isn't steady action. Right? So what that means is everybody has a bad day, and on the days that human beings have a bad day, they can break the progress of like thousands of other days where they've been good. Right? We have to start playfully, kind of how Elon Musk suggests to entrepreneurs, where he's like, okay, this is Elon Musk started a rocket company, and one of his friends came and showed him like a bunch of rockets exploding, and like he's like, that's your money, man. And Elon Musk said his vision was like, okay, so let's start from failure. People say you're gonna fail, sure, let's start from failure. Let's see how we can reduce the percentage of that failure, rather than thinking I'm going to succeed, yeah, success, rather than having a shaped success lead you, having a mentality of seeing the present market and readjusting, as if a business never survives on one business model if it dares stand in the market. So the stronger rat, the governmental power, has to be resourceful at least. It doesn't have to make the weaker rat win, but it can make the weaker rat continue to play. What does that mean? That means people are left in a strange society. It's kind of savage, where 8 billion people, okay, are in this system of a world, and it's kind of like we're telling them, here's how you make a living. You got to be a miner. You got to be a miner and everyday mine. Mine for your success. Now, this miner mentality is the sacrifice of all the internal innovation that could happen during that time. That means sometimes when I see a human being kind of not realizing what's behind their eyes, it's on some level I just bow to that being. Because they either have, it's as if the material realm is their guide. Matter is their spirit guide. What can you say? The person needs material phenomena. It's like right now I ask you, it's like I ask you, do you have a brain? And you say like, Yes, I do, man. Everybody has a brain. And then suddenly the person says, bring your brain in front of me on the table and show me, and then I'll believe you have a brain. And the person's like, if I bring my brain out, it's like there's nothing there then. Right? So it becomes one of those things, even though you can't see your brain, you have one. Even though you can't see your heart beating, you know it's beating. So there's certain moments in nature, even though you cannot see something of an like externally too much chaotically changing, but there is something happening. That's what I mean by the heartbeat of the planet, the heartbeat of the universal sector. As Rumi says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a place. I will meet you there. A sort of mystical, beautiful glorification of the field that all particles move in. You think it's like if the person can identify with a bunch of atoms being a physical body, the person can also imbue the same sort of life into a collective system. You know, it's like the moment you think, all right, I got a soul, then you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, what if the planet has a soul? What if the galactic sector has a soul? What if the soul has endless souls, you know? And so you reach a point where you're like, okay, it's not like clay to play with and then be certain of. You have to watch nature if you want to learn from it. So anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. I feel every person has a role to play to the new relationship of human beings in becoming aware of language. First, you gotta, in some sense, fight off, and I'm saying that playfully, fight off language in your inner reality. So what does that mean? That means just find your true eyes and justify in accordance to what is real to you, what life means. And then, and then, the conscious sight lifts off into its unconscious texture. It becomes the candlelight mixing with sunlight, the temporary story becoming an infinite echo, like a, how can I say it, an infinite line. It's like what you fear now. It's just like how they say one man's trash is another man's treasure. It's like one man's fear is not another man's fear. It's like, what is there to fear? We're on a rock in the middle of space. If we wanted to be really afraid, we should freak out all the time. You know, it's like fear isn't the loudest voice in the room. Our efficient vision of where the species is heading is. And Mr. Within asks, like, you know, like, I feel this should have been like one of the first assignments in the educational system given to the child, that what is your vision of the world? What is your vision of what can change from the world? And children have pure emotions because their mind hasn't been too exposed to the harsher programs of culture and civilization and just karma. You know, there are certain things that later on your eyes will open to, but when somebody tells you and your eyes are not open to see it, you at least wonder why. And it doesn't have to be too deep. You have to, in some sense, find a balanced, beautiful garden of intelligence to walk in. So think of it this way. The religious mentality said, have faith in revelation. The Abrahamic religions are all their ideology centers around revelation. And this centering around revelation means that every belief, every concept in the Abrahamic universe comes down to the core, which is God's will. So, what does that mean? That means every religious person is acknowledging the unknown will, the unknown movement of the cosmos as the command of a divine authority, it's as if life is God's thoughts. So it's this sort of strange way where the religious mentality kept the unknown in a very strict way alive. But when the person acknowledges the unknown, like the modern man, after some point you're a composer of your own freedom. Life is not just about telling a sort of storytelling nature. It's like everything is a story. This moment where I'm speaking, there requires to be a context. The context is narrative. Just like how this picture, right now we see this picture, this wallpaper I have for this talk, this orange sky. This picture is showing us a moment in time, but we are not actually there. It's as if it's a world in our world, right? It's like a hollow world. The picture is a real picture of that moment, but that moment no longer exists in some sense. So, what is this picture? This picture is a kind of echo of past reality where we're entertaining, right? It's like when people say something has sentimental value, what does that mean? That means they have not forgotten their past. And remember, there are many cruel modern systems, and the strategy, though, it's just the most basic war strategy where it's divide and conquer. So when they divide a person, then the person has to first attend to that division before they can even confront the opponent. It's like suddenly like one of your shoelaces going on untied in the battlefield. You're like, okay, I don't have time for this, you know. There's nothing more great, I find, than realizing if you were not meant to be here as a being, then why is the existence here? So it means don't language cannot explain what is beyond it. And that's why emotional stability requires a greater sensitivity. It's more of us realizing the child psychology. It's like the child doesn't learn language. It doesn't even pay too much attention to movement. It pays attention to its emotions, which arise from hot and cold, from the warmth that it has received and the warmth it hasn't. So that emotional dependence of the child is still influencing the decision making of the modern man. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. I think I pretty much kind of squeezed every drop of orange juice from this orange. But care for the emotions of your species. Care for the the winds of evolution. We are reaching a time where we have to begin articulating what the movements of a collective being would look like. That is the kind of global vision, I find. The global vision, it's like United Nations, the building is more enlightened than the people in it. Because if the nations are united, how are they nations? Do you know what I mean? So it's like the United Nations is another way of saying one nation, or one, or at least one reality that all nations can agree to, at least. Peace breeds innovation and genius. When there is a safe creative space, creativity runs wild. And we must care for the mind of people, because why is it here? So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.